The Royal Guards are among the most iconic symbols of Britain's long history and traditions. To the public, they represent the perfect example of discipline, strength, and dedication. These guards stand tall, completely still, in front of places, like Buckingham Palace with their tall black hats and red uniforms. The moment you look at them, you can feel the sense of duty they carry. There's something almost magical about their presence. They look like living statues. They have one main job, to guard the royal family and royal palaces. But behind those strong, unwavering faces, there's a world of emotions, thoughts, and moments that the world doesn't often see. The Royal Guard's role isn't just about standing still. It's a task that demands absolute focus and perfection. Every movement, every step, every gesture is carefully rehearsed and carried out with military precision. For a guard, standing at attention isn't just a simple act of holding still. It's about showing respect to the royal family, to history, and to the traditions that have been followed for hundreds of years. The training is rigorous and unforgiving. Guards spend years learning how to stand without moving a muscle, how to walk in perfect formation, and how to carry out their duties without breaking the strict code of behavior. But the thing about these guards, the thing that people often forget, is that they are human. Beneath their perfectly pressed uniforms and serious expressions, they are just like everyone else. They experience joy, sadness, excitement, and exhaustion. However, for the duration of their shift, they are required to suppress these emotions. They must remain utterly composed, regardless of what is happening around them. They can't smile, laugh, or even acknowledge the people who pass by. Their job is to maintain an aura of strength and professionalism. Imagine the pressure of being in that position. Every time a guard steps out in front of a crowd, they know that eyes are on them. People from all over the world come to watch the Royal Guards, eager to catch a glimpse of these living statues. Tourists take photos, sometimes trying to get them to break character. There's a sense of expectation that the guards must live up to. No matter how tired or distracted they might feel, they must stay still, they must keep their focus. They can't make any mistakes, not even the smallest one. Any slip-up could bring attention to their humanity, and that's something that must be avoided at all costs. The life of a Royal Guard isn't easy, and it requires an extraordinary level of commitment. From the moment they join the service, they begin a journey of physical and mental endurance. They learn how to manage their emotions, to stay alert and focused even when nothing is happening around them, and to endure the sometimes harsh elements of weather. They stand for hours, exposed to the wind, rain, and even snow, without so much as flinching. It is said that a guard's ability to endure such conditions is a testament to their strength of character. And while the public may admire the guards for their discipline, they rarely think about the challenges these men and women face behind the scenes. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Royal Guard is how they maintain a perfect balance between public duty and personal sacrifice. They are always aware that their role is not just about them. It's about representing something far bigger than themselves, the monarchy, the country, and the values of the British people. This sense of duty drives them to maintain their composure at all times, no matter the circumstances. But what happens when these guards experience moments of vulnerability or emotion that they cannot hide? What happens when their humanity breaks through the thick wall of discipline they've built around themselves? It is rare for anyone to witness these moments. After all, the Royal Guard is trained to be unwavering, unmoving, and unshakable. But every now and then, a small crack in that solid exterior will appear, revealing the human side of the Guard. These moments, while brief, are powerful. They remind us that despite the stiff upper lip and stone-cold expressions, the Royal Guards are people just like anyone else. They have families, friends, and dreams. They experience personal triumphs and heartaches just like the rest of us. In some ways, the Royal Guard's strict training can be seen as a way of protecting them from the emotional toll their job can take. The pressure to perform flawlessly, the constant public scrutiny, and the long hours on their feet can wear down even the strongest individuals. And yet, despite the challenges, they remain committed to their duties. They know that breaking character, even for a moment, could bring unwanted attention or criticism, but that doesn't mean that these moments don't occur. One such moment, which happened during a changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace, became a well-known story among those who witnessed it. It was a hot summer day, and a crowd had gathered to watch the ceremony. Among them was a young child, probably no older than 6 or 7, who was watching the guards with wide, excited eyes. The child seemed to be absolutely captivated by the sight of the towering guards in their uniforms, standing so still and poised. Suddenly the child began to cry. It wasn't a loud, dramatic cry, but it was enough to catch the attention of those around them. The child's parents, who were trying to comfort their little one, seemed helpless. The young child was overcome with emotion, not understanding why the guards never smiled or waved back. For a brief moment, the serious expression on one of the guards' faces softened. As he stood watch, he looked down at the child, and for a split second, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. It wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It wasn't a smile meant to entertain. It was a small, fleeting smile, a gesture of warmth, understanding, and empathy. To the child, it meant the world. They stopped crying and stared up at the guard, their eyes wide with wonder. In that moment, the guard had broken character, but not in a way that undermined his duty. Rather, he showed that even in the most disciplined of roles there is room for compassion and connection. That small human moment was a reminder that these guards, despite their uniform, are not just symbols of strength and duty. They are also capable of kindness, empathy, and emotion. In a way, it helped those who saw it understand that no matter how strict the rules of conduct may be, everyone has their moments of vulnerability. Even the Royal Guard, with their rigid training and stoic exterior, are people who have the capacity to connect with others on a deeply human level. Such moments may be rare, but they remind us that even in the most seemingly impersonal roles, there is always a glimpse of humanity waiting to shine through. And it is this rare blend of strength and sensitivity, discipline and warmth, that makes the Royal Guard not just a symbol of tradition, but a symbol of the complexity of being human. The changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace is one of the most anticipated events for tourists visiting London. Every day, crowds gather to witness the meticulous movements of the guards as they march in perfect formation. The guards are always dressed in their traditional uniforms, bright red coats, tall black bearskin hats, and shiny buttons that gleam under the sunlight. The event is a grand spectacle, and the guards' performance is nothing short of impressive. However, the ceremony also offers rare glimpses into moments when the usual composure of the guards breaks, revealing a softer, more human side that the public rarely sees. On one particularly warm summer day, the changing of the guard was especially busy. The streets around Buckingham Palace were packed with people, tourists from all over the world, Londoners taking a midday stroll, and families eager to witness the famous ceremony. The air was thick with excitement, and the noise of chattering voices filled the space as visitors eagerly awaited the guards' arrival. Everyone seemed to be looking for the perfect angle for photographs, trying to capture the perfect shot of the soldiers performing their duty. Among the many spectators that day, there was a young family, a mother, father, and their child, who appeared to be about 6 years old. The little girl clutched her stuffed animal tightly in her arms, her eyes wide with fascination as she gazed up at the guards. Her parents were speaking softly to each other, trying to explain the ceremony to their daughter. It was clear that this was a special day for the family, a day they had spent a lot of time preparing for. The little girl had been talking about seeing the guards for weeks, and now that the moment was finally here, her excitement was overflowing. As the guards began their march, the child's excitement turned into a mix of awe and confusion. She watched the guards with intense curiosity. At first, she smiled as she saw the disciplined, synchronized movements, but soon, the expressions on the guards' faces began to intrigue her. They didn't smile, they didn't wave, and they didn't look at the crowd. To a young child, this might seem strange, even a little bit intimidating. After all, these were supposed to be friendly figures, symbols of British tradition, yet they acted as if the world around them didn't exist. As the guards continued their procession, the little girl's face changed. She began to frown, her excitement shifting to uncertainty. She looked up at her mother, confused by the guards' lack of interaction. The mother gently explained that the guards had a very important job and couldn't talk to people while they were on duty. But for the little girl, this explanation didn't seem to ease her disappointment. She had imagined a different experience, one where the guards might smile at her or wave back. Instead, she felt like she was being ignored by these towering figures, and her face reflected the sadness of not getting the response she had hoped for. Before long, her small frown deepened into a full-on pout, and soon she started to cry. It wasn't a loud, sobbing cry, but the kind of quiet, subtle tears that come when a child is genuinely confused and hurt by something they don't understand. The mother immediately bent down to comfort her, but the little girl continued to cry softly, her eyes still fixed on the guards. She couldn't understand why the soldiers didn't acknowledge her. The crowd around them seemed to notice, and for a moment, the noise of chatter faded as everyone's attention shifted to the child. Despite the lively atmosphere and the crowd's general excitement, the scene became incredibly quiet as people observed the child's distress. The little girl's soft sobs were the only sounds breaking through the otherwise composed atmosphere. The mother tried to soothe her by softly rubbing her back and whispering comforting words, but the girl's confusion remained. She kept wiping her tears with the sleeve of her jacket, her eyes never leaving the guards who stood unyielding and unmoving. As the ceremony continued, the guard closest to the family, who had been standing perfectly still and looking straight ahead, was unknowingly drawn into the situation. His job was to remain focused, to keep his attention on the task at hand. Guards like him are taught never to break their concentration, never to acknowledge the crowd, and certainly never to show emotion. They are to embody the ideal of military precision, always disciplined, always composed. But in that moment, as he stood tall and unwavering, he noticed the little girl in front of him. He saw her tears and the way her small body trembled. There was a long pause as he processed what was happening. His gaze softened for the briefest of seconds, and something unexpected happened. He allowed himself a small, subtle smile. It wasn't an obvious grin, and it certainly wasn't meant for anyone else to notice. It was a silent, knowing gesture, one that conveyed understanding and empathy. It was the smallest crack in the ironclad exterior that the public rarely gets to see. For a moment, the guard wasn't just a symbol of discipline and tradition. He was a human being, moved by the sight of a child who simply wanted to see kindness in the world around her. The little girl, still watching the guard, seemed to sense something change in the air. Her tears slowed and her frown softened as she stared at the guard, her eyes now wide with wonder. She didn't understand why he had smiled, but she could feel that something had shifted. The guard's subtle act of kindness had calmed her down and the tears stopped. She no longer seemed so disappointed. She felt in that brief moment that the guard was acknowledging her in his own way, even if it wasn't through the wave or smile she had imagined. It was enough for her. She wiped her eyes and looked back up at her parents, her face now a little brighter, even if the sadness had not completely faded. For those watching, it was a moment of pure, unspoken communication. The crowd around the family seemed to notice too, and a quiet murmur of appreciation spread through them. No one expected the guard to break character, and yet in that fleeting second his small act of kindness left a lasting impact. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was meaningful. The little girl, who had been so upset only moments before, now seemed at peace, her tears replaced by a sense of calm. After a moment, the guard returned to his usual stillness, the smile disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. His expression became neutral once again, and he resumed his duty, blending back into the strict role he was meant to play. The ceremony continued, and the world went back to its usual rhythm, with tourists snapping photos and families enjoying the spectacle. But for the little girl and her family, the moment they had witnessed was unforgettable. They had seen something special, a small act of compassion in the middle of a strict, unyielding tradition. The story of that brief exchange between the guard and the child spread quickly among the crowd. People who had witnessed the moment shared it with others, and soon it became a memory that was passed from one person to another. It was a story about the humanity of those who seem to be untouchable, who stand in silence and discipline for hours on end. It was a reminder that even the most stoic of individuals, those who appear to have no time or desire for human connection, are capable of acts of kindness. The child, for her part, never forgot the moment when the guard smiled at her. It stayed with her as she grew older, a reminder that even in a world where it sometimes feels like people are too busy or too distant to care, There are small moments of connection that can make a world of difference. The life of a royal guard is one of strict discipline and high expectations. These men and women are chosen for their physical endurance, mental strength, and their ability to perform under pressure. For years, they undergo intense training that prepares them for the demanding and often grueling tasks they will face. Every guard is well aware of the importance of their role, not just in standing watch over royal palaces, but in representing an age-old tradition that stretches back centuries. Their presence on duty is a symbol of loyalty, duty, and unwavering commitment. Yet behind their perfectly composed faces, there are stories of personal struggles, sacrifices, and silent battles that most people will never see. One such story is that of a guard who had served for many years in the prestigious role. This particular guard, let's call him Thomas, was known for his impeccable discipline and unwavering focus. He had joined the army at a young age and, after years of hard work, had earned his place among the royal guards. From the outside, Thomas appeared to be the epitome of what it meant to be a guard, strong, composed, and almost unshakable in his demeanor. He was always on time, always prepared, and never let a single distraction sway him from his duties. However, behind his solid exterior, Thomas was dealing with something deeply personal. His mother, whom he had been very close to, had recently passed away. The news of her death had hit him hard, but he had kept his emotions locked away, as was expected of him. In the world of the royal guards, there was no room for personal grief. There were no allowances for emotional breakdowns or moments of vulnerability. Thomas had learned this lesson early on during his training. The guard's role was to maintain an unwavering presence, regardless of what was happening in their private lives. As the days went by after his mother's passing, Thomas found himself growing increasingly numb. He still reported for duty, still stood at attention, still went through the motions of his ceremonial duties. But inside, he was struggling to cope with the loss. He missed his mother terribly, and the grief was often overwhelming. There were moments when he would stand on his post, eyes fixed straight ahead, and feel the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. But he never let it show. He couldn't afford to let anyone see the pain he was feeling. One of the most challenging days came when he was assigned to stand guard during a special ceremony at Buckingham Palace. The ceremony was to be attended by foreign dignitaries, and the eyes of the world would be on the royal guards. It was an important day, one where everything had to go perfectly. Thomas was well aware of this and had prepared himself for the task. However, as he stood there on the palace grounds, his mind kept drifting back to his mother. The memories of her kindness, the times they had spent together, and the grief of her passing consumed him. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on his duties, but it was no use. The emotions bubbled up inside him, threatening to spill over. He could feel the tightness in his chest, the lump in his throat, and the sting of unshed tears in his eyes. But there was no time for tears, no time to grieve. He had a job to do. He reminded himself that he was a royal guard and his duty came first. As he stood motionless, his hands gripping his rifle, his thoughts were a whirlwind of sadness and loss. It was almost as if the world around him had faded away, and all that was left was the crushing weight of his grief. In that moment, something remarkable happened. As Thomas stood tall, trying to hold it all together, he felt a quiet presence beside him. A fellow guard, someone who had known Thomas for years, had noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. Without breaking the rules or drawing attention to themselves, the other guard gave Thomas a silent nod. It was a small gesture, but to Thomas it meant everything. It was as if the other guard understood. In that brief moment, there was no need for words. The nod was a silent acknowledgement of his pain, a quiet gesture of solidarity in the midst of his emotional storm. The brief exchange didn't make Thomas's grief go away, but it helped him. It reminded him that even in the world of the royal guards, where emotional expression is often suppressed, there was still room for empathy and understanding. It was a simple act, but it showed Thomas that he wasn't alone. There was someone who saw him, who recognized the burden he was carrying, and who silently offered him support. It wasn't a dramatic act of kindness, but it was enough to keep Thomas going. After the ceremony, when the crowds had dispersed and the guards were able to relax a little, Thomas found himself alone in a quiet corner of the palace grounds. His fellow guards were busy with their own duties, and he was left to process the overwhelming feelings he had kept hidden all day. He felt the weight of his emotions once again, but this time he allowed himself to acknowledge them. He knew he couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. His mother's death had left a deep void in his heart, and no amount of training or discipline could erase that. As he stood there, a deep sense of exhaustion washed over him. It wasn't just the physical strain of standing for hours on end, but the mental and emotional toll that had been building up for weeks. Thomas thought about the nod he had received earlier. It had been a small gesture, but it had reminded him that even in the strictest, most disciplined of environments, there was space for human connection. The Royal Guard was more than just a uniform. It was made up of individuals who, despite their stoic exteriors, cared for each other in ways that often went unnoticed. That night, as Thomas lay in his bed, he thought about the day's events. He thought about how his grief had been with him the entire time, but how he had managed to hold it together. He thought about the nod from his fellow guard, a small but powerful reminder that he wasn't alone. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a little bit of peace. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult. The pain of losing his mother would take time to heal, and the expectations of being a Royal Guard would always be there. But in that moment, he realized that it was okay to feel human emotions, even in the most disciplined of roles. He didn't have to bury his grief forever. There would be other moments, other opportunities to express it, and maybe, just maybe, he would find the strength to carry on. The story of Thomas is one that many guards could relate to, though few ever openly speak about their struggles. Being a Royal Guard is not just a job. It's a life commitment, one that requires great personal sacrifice, and while the public sees only the perfect, unmoving figure standing at attention, the guards themselves carry burdens that often go unnoticed. Yet, just as Thomas experienced, there are moments of silent support and understanding that help them navigate the challenges they face. These small acts of kindness remind them that, even in the most disciplined and stoic of roles, it is possible to find compassion and connection.